Good evening. It's time once again to talk more in depth about one of my favorite books. This time we will be talking about the slim, svelte poetry collection Black Aperture by Matt Rasmussen. This was a finalist for the National Book Award in 2013 when it came out. Matt Rasmussen is a poet from the Twin Cities. He's from northern Minnesota, but he lives in the Twin Cities. Like I said, this was published in 2013 by Louisiana State University Press. It was one of those instances where he won a literary contest that was proctored by, who did it? Jane Hirschfield. So she selected him as the winner, and then they worked together and made this book. You can see it is signed, and he wrote a very lengthy little note to me in it. To Rowan, thank you so much for your kind words about my work. I really appreciate the support. I hope you like the book. Take care. Best of luck in your own poetry and beyond. See you at the Galleria. Smiley face, Matt. That's a reference to I used to work at the time at a Barnes & Noble in a mall called the Galleria, which is a mall for rich people in the suburbs of Minneapolis. I'm not kidding. It's literally like an upscale mall that only sells stuff for rich people. It also happens to have a Barnes & Noble in it. But so, Black Aperture is a poetry collection that is largely about the suicide of Matt's brother, which happened when Matt was in high school. His older brother committed suicide. And it's not exclusively about that, but it is sort of the theme that runs through the whole book. You've got a lot of poems about it. You've got poems with the repeated title of After Suicide. There's 3 or 4 poems with that title in this book. But you've also got poems that sort of deal with just a general disaffection with the world and depression and the wildness of depression outside of the city. This could be suburban or rural. I believe he grew up in International Falls, Minnesota, if I remember correctly. So that's more rural, very far north, right, literally along the border with Canada. But so, for instance, I'm gonna read a couple of poems from this collection to demonstrate what I'm talking about. But this is one that's not explicitly about suicide, but sort of captures that disaffection and reminded me, this whole book really resonated with me and made me feel like I had a probably similar youth to Matt Rasmussen in some ways. This is called The Orange Leaves. Rocked back and forth through the air as if someone was scraping the rust off the sunset, the chair we doused in gasoline burned, howling from the corner of the field. Its flame bent sideways in the wind, touched the tall, dry grass, and the entire meadow burned until it was black as a parking lot. Walking across its smoldering coat, we found a white deer antler that refused to burn, and some chromed beer cans that blew away as we neared. The huddling evergreens turned their backs and kept to themselves. The field's remaining embers, drawn upward, were pieces of the evening moon, leaving for home. So most of the poems in this are pretty short, and they are largely couplets or triplets with short lines. It's divided into 3 sections. The second section is called An Elegy in 10 Parts, which is 10 poems that are all titled X, Elegy in X parts, Elegy in 10 parts. It also features the only poem that's it's couplets, but it's got long lines. But it jumps out at you on the page because it looks so much different than all the other poems. But like I said, suicide is the sort of recurring theme throughout the book. The first poem titled After Suicide in the book goes, a hole is nothing but what remains around it. My brother stood in the refrigerator light drinking milk that poured out of his head through thick black curls down his back into a puddle growing larger around him. My body stood between the living room and kitchen, one foot on worn carpet, one on cold linoleum. He couldn't hear his name clouding from my mouth, settling in the fluorescent air. I wanted to put my finger into the hole, feel the smooth channel he escaped through, stop the milk so he could swallow it, but my body held as if driven into place. The milk on the floor reflected the light, then became it, floated upward and outward, filling every shadow, blowing the dark open. We also have meditations on, there's a couple of poems that are about hunting and about bullets, because his brother committed suicide with a gun, and so we look at bullets in more abstract ways. The opening poem of the collection is called Trajectory, and it follows the trajectory of a bullet as it leaves a gun, passes through a deer, and then embeds itself in a tree. I was lucky enough to get to study a workshop with Matt when I was in college. When I took I took both a year of both fiction workshop and poetry workshop because I could, so I did. And when I was in my poetry workshop, my professor, Kerry Waterman, had us read this collection and brought Matt in and had him, read for us and read some of our work and workshop with us, which was a very rewarding experience. I think I didn't get to buy this book at the time because I was too broke, but I loved it so much that I then later went and saw him read at St. Paul Public Library and bought it from him and got it signed then. This is his only collection. He had a chapbook a number of years before this, but it's been 8 years since this came out and he hasn't put out another book, which is really a shame. I look forward to whatever he publishes next with great enthusiasm. I remember us talking about, he said that he had an idea for doing a collection based around poems that he wrote when he was in the Peace Corps in Africa, which would be, I think, a really cool idea for a collection. This one, though, it's dealing with an incredibly dark subject and doing it in an incredibly elegant way. I'm a person who's had their life touched by suicide, not as directly and devastatingly as Matt has, but he manages to give voice to grief in a way that is elegant and simple and brutal and universal. If you have an interest in books about grief, if you don't read much poetry, I think that this book would still appeal to you. I'm gonna wrap it up by just reading the second to last poem in this collection, which is my favorite poem of all time. I can't remember what, I think it was the Little Literary Tag, some tag that's been going around somewhat recently. One of the questions was, do you have a poem that you have memorized that you could recite? And I think the only poem that I love enough that I would memorize it is this poem, though I don't know what occasion I would ever have to recite it. But it's called Reverse Suicide. The guy Dad sold your car to comes back to get his money, leaves the car. With filthy rags, we rub it down until it doesn't shine, and wipe your blood into the seams of the seat. Each snowflake stirs before lifting into the sky as I learn you won't be dead. The unsuffering ends when the mess of your head pulls together around a bullet in your mouth. You spit it into Dad's gun before arriving in the driveway while the evening brightens, and we pour bag after bag of leaves on the lawn, waiting for them to leap onto the bare branches. Yeah, this is just it's a very short collection. It's like 60 pages long, which is short even for a poetry book. You can easily read it in one sitting, but I've read this book 10 times, and it never ceases to floor me and remind me of how powerful poetry can be. I know a lot of people don't like modern poetry. I suffer from not really liking modern poetry and really not liking old poetry. This is my favorite collection of poetry of all time, more than Sylvia Plath. It resonates with me on a really personal level. I implore you to check it out. It's something that, I mean, BookTube in general, you don't see tons of poetry on BookTube. I've never seen anybody on BookTube talk about this book. It's not like Matt's an unknown dude. Like I said, he was a finalist for the National Book Award, which is no small feat. I believe he won the Minnesota Book Award for this book as well, for poetry. Which again, I mean, you think the Minnesota Book Award, whatever, but we've got some heavy hitters in Minnesota, like Marlon James lives here. It's not like there's no literary scene in Minnesota. Anyways, please check this book out. I'm pretty sure you can still buy copies of it. Hang on. Yeah, this book is still in print. If you're a cheapskate, you can get a used one on Amazon for 62 cents. There's no excuses. I mean, obviously, I would rather you didn't do that because I would love it if Matt got more money. But read this book. It's so good. Yeah.